Starting us off with number 10 is Albert Engel. Now this one's pretty messed up, but we like to start these lists with a bang now, don't we? Back in 1916 in Wisconsin, Albert Engel impressed everyone in town with his very realistic looking scarecrow. So much so his neighbors went to his house to ask how he had made it. But when his family answered the door, they said that Albert hadn't been home for days. The next day, another neighbor heard about the scarecrow and decided to check it out. But the closer he got, the more he realized that something was just off. It wore a wide-brimmed hat, so you couldn't really see the face of the scarecrow, but up close the neighbor realized to his horror that the scarecrow was Albert Engel himself. Police were immediately called and Albert's death was ruled a suicide. His hat was still on when he hung himself, so maybe people just assumed he was a scarecrow when perhaps that wasn't his intention at all. Either way, how did people think he was a scarecrow when he clearly had skin on his arms and not straw? But maybe that neighbor was the first one to see him up close, who knows?
Next up at number 9 now, we have The Creepy Farm. I found a story on yourghoststories.com, and as soon as I saw the title, I knew it was right for this video. It was written by Angelus Crudus, who said, "I've been reading stories on this site for months now and love the hair-raising creepiness of them all. I moved in with my husband 4 years ago. He lives, and now I do too, on a 100-acre farm in West Quebec, Canada. The house is small and used to be a hunting shanty, then added on to make a lath and plaster house. It's over 150 years old and has 2 bedrooms and a bathroom upstairs, complete with slanting ceilings. My husband bought the place off the guy whose family has lived there since it was settled back in the day. The man's father was a drunk, and when we were cleaning up the place, we found hundreds of liquor bottles hidden all over the outside buildings. The first creepy thing that happened was the knock at the door. It was a clear knock, 3 times. My dog even barked, but when I went to the door, no one was there. We are the only house on our street, and our nearest neighbor is a mile away at least. It isn't like it was kids playing a prank on us. My husband and I didn't say much about it. We don't like to call attention to whoever it is that lives in the house with us because we feel like if we leave it in peace, it will do the same for us." The next thing happened when we were cleaning the drunken old man's tools up in the barn. There was a huge saw blade about 4 feet across used on old tractors. There was a 9-inch nail in the wall and the saw blade was hanging on it through the holes in the middle. My husband was under it cleaning up some dirt when it fell off that nail and hit him on his hand. He was wearing leather gloves and so was unharmed if not unnerved. The nail was so long someone would physically have to move it away from the wall for it to fall like it did. Then just the other week I was doing the dishes and reached to the cupboard to put a plate away when the cupboard opened on its own for me. It was so weird, like someone wanted to help me with the dishes. I didn't say anything about it to my husband as it freaked me out, but 3 minutes later he saw someone walk by our window. Of course, when we went outside, no one was there. It was very strange. Then a couple of days later, the lights flickered on and off. They did this several times, but when my husband went out to the breaker box, nothing was wrong. He even went through each switch and turned them off then back on to make sure. When he got back inside, the lights flickered again. It was only the lights on one side of my house. The whole thing is very strange. Moving on to number 8 now, we have Voices. This one came from Ori15 on Reddit, and it's a little reminder that it's not just houses and castles that can be haunted. He said, "A couple with a ranch let me volunteer for a summer. I just wanted to learn how to care for horses and play cowboy. Well, they called me out and asked if I would do the evening feed for their animals while they went to visit their family in a town that was about an hour away. I said yes and got started. So I was alone with a bunch of horses and dogs. All of the horses were pinned up. I had not even let them into the pasture yet. The sun was still up. It was the opposite of a creepy time. Well, it took a left turn to Crazy Town when I walked into the barn and I heard people started talking. I was all alone. Nobody at least a mile in any direction and almost no way anyone could sneak in to mess with me. The voices were very low and unclear, so I have no idea what was said. The only reason I know I'm not crazy is that the dogs that followed me in acted like they heard it too. One started barking at where the voices came from and the other started running around the room growling. Moving on to number 7 now, we have the zombie horse. That title might give away the main theme of the story, but you don't get to say zombie horse very often in life, so I just took my shot there. Reddit user P. Verplogen said, I grew up in a large suburb outside of Houston. It was during the early 90s when a lot of farmland settled by the original German immigrants was being brought up by developers and turned into new homes. My family lived at the very end of our subdivision, and past my house was a great expanse of farmland flanked by thick woods and old decaying wooden shacks from the 1800s. Every day on my walk home from school I would pass by a particularly overgrown old shack, which I guess must have at some point been our house, which leaned like it would fall over at any minute on its tired old foundation, and just beyond it was a long row of fences. It was my daily commute to and from elementary school, and I'd walk by it, pick up interesting rocks and things, and I never really thought much of it. There was always construction while the subdivision was expanding, so they had dug long trenches for what I suppose was for a sewer and erected electrical lines through the farmland. Beyond the fence was a small lake, which I had often snuck in to explore and catch frogs, but after an encounter with a water moccasin, which is a species of pit viper, I decided to stay clear of it. The farm had cows which would meander through the meadow and one large black horse. A storm had rolled in during the previous night, and I remember that the clouds were so thick and black that it felt like night when I had arrived at school. It didn't take long before the storm was in full force and the power had gone out at school. Our teacher decided to have us all sit together on the floor and read to us for the rest of the day, which was fine by me. The storm had passed, but the darkness lingered on when I got out of school. I walked down the now muddy path in the strange darkness, past the crooked house and beside the aging fence, each step becoming more and more difficult as the mud collected on my shoes. That's when I heard a thrashing. The cows weren't there, but I remember clearly that old black horse. I remember thinking that it was sick or injured or something. Its black coat was slick and steam was rising off its body in the cold air. It was kicking its back legs wildly and violently slamming its face into the muck. It had a weird look to it, not like it was panicking, but like it was calm, and it didn't look like it was out of breath. Again it slammed its head into the mud and kicked out its legs, then shook its head from side to side furiously. I stopped to watch it. Looking back, I wish I had just kept walking. I remember that after a minute or two it stopped and looked up at me, the grime sliding off its face. It must have been in a matter of seconds because I had no time to react and the horse had charged towards me. It didn't jump over the fence, but instead lowered its massive head and tore through the gap between the fence boards. The wood cracked and splintered as its muscled body strained and its long neck extended through the gap. The horse savagely lashed out and started snapping at me. With its entire body covered in huge swollen muscles, it would recoil and then slam all of its weight back into the fence, attempting to break the boards. It did that again and again. Its enormous broad teeth came inches from me and I fell out of my shoes backwards, leaving them stuck in the mud. It's a miracle that the fence was holding it back. I could see it clearly now. The horse was burned badly. The skin around its mouth had been seared off and tendrils of pink bloody skin snaked its way over its face like a spider web. The absence of skin made its teeth seem even larger, its black gums exposed and its mouth frothing with spit that I could feel hitting me in the face. At that moment I was absolutely terrified that this horse would kill me. I remember wanting to get up, but a thick mud had me trapped. I also remember the smell. It was like sulphur, a mixture of wet animal, burned meat and singed hair. But what has stuck with me the most were its eyes. They were cloudy like black ink poured into milk. As it struggled to reach me through the fence, its nostrils flared and I could feel the heat of its breath on me, its teeth snapping shut over and over. The clacking noise of the heavy teeth slamming together was deafening. I left my shoes and ran home. I remember my mother screaming at me about the mud when I stormed in. I told her about the horse that had nearly killed me and that I had left my shoes there in the mud. She grabbed me by the arm and was going to make me take her back there to get them, but I cried and screamed not to go, so she went alone. When she got back she had my muddy old sneakers in her hands and she told me that she saw the horse. It was dead. A farmhand was dragging its body behind a tractor and he told my mom that the horse had died earlier that day. One of the power lines that had been installed running through the meadow was knocked over during the storm and the horse must have been near the lake because it had been electrocuted and killed. He said that it had died instantly beside that lake when the power went out hours ago. Next up at number 6 now, we have the 7th barn. The story goes that there was once a wealthy farmer who owned a lot of land in Ohio. He built a new barn on his property every time his wife had a baby. He named the barns after each of his children, and by the time this story takes place, they had 6 kids and were expecting number 7. However, the farmer's wife died in childbirth, and so did her unborn baby. The farmer went insane with grief and couldn't tend to his farm. The family had no money and the farm started going under. Then, on one night, in the depths of his madness and despair, the farmer took an axe and led his children out to the barns where he murdered them one by one. He buried each of their bodies in the 6 barns that had been named after their births. Then, the farmer went to the 7th barn where he hung himself. As the story goes, all of the barns were eventually torn down and the land was sold off, all except for the 7th barn. Nobody wanted to buy the land because of what happened there, so it was abandoned and soon fell into disrepair. They say if you go to that barn at night, you can see the ghost of the farmer hanging from the rafters, his body swinging back and forth in the wind, dwelling on his terrible crime for all eternity. No one was ever really sure where the 7th barn was located, although it's definitely in Ohio. Some say it was the Kranz farm in the Cuyahoga Valley, and others say it was at the top of the world in Northampton. In 1997, a local Ohio teacher claimed that, after a lot of research, he had finally managed to track down the real location of the infamous 7th barn. He said that none of the barns had actually ever been torn down. The land had just been divided up and sold off, and the barns had simply been incorporated into neighbouring farms. Moving on to number 5 now, we have The Figure. This one was submitted to ghostsandghouls.com by one of their readers. They said, "I live in South Africa, and this is where my story takes place. Me and a friend of mine, whose name is Berend, were travelling through the countryside on our way to a small town called Delaryville. We were used to small towns and country areas as we grew up there. However, I had never experienced anything like this. As we were driving, bad luck struck us like a hot iron and both tyres on the left side went flat. His car was a piece of junk. We were soon on the side of the road at 2 AM with only the full moon to light the area around us. There was no civilization nearby, only local farmhouses far away. So I decided to leave Berend with the car and walk on to find any entrance to a local farm. I walked for about 2/3 of a mile and at last found a gate. The gate was short and could easily be scaled. It was locked with a chain, but I still climbed over in desperation. I could see the house's light in the distance, so I walked along a gravel road towards it. As I kept walking towards the house, I heard a very loud boom. At first I thought it was cannon fire, but it couldn't be, as there are no military bases around that area. I only heard this once, but decided to move on. Now the skeptic would obviously have an explanation, and I'm not saying it was cannon fire, for it could have been something else, but it pretty much sounded like an old type cannon. What could make a sound like that at 2 in the morning? Anyway, I continued. Now the countryside was a wide open landscape. There were only fields of grass for miles and miles with little quantities of trees. So about 20 meters from the side of the gravel road, there stood a big tree. As I said, it was around 2 AM and only the moonlight was shining, but something stood underneath that tree. A dark figure was just standing there, facing me. It looked like a human figure, so I was immediately struck with fear. I thought there must be some explanation for whatever was standing there, so I kept walking. When I looked behind me again, it was gone. How could something that big disappear so fast? I immediately turned around and ran away, back towards the main road. I told Berend, but he never believed me. Later on, I found out there were skirmishes between the local farmers and the British Army in the Anglo-Boer War in that area. Next up, number 4 now, we have the Baldu Mystery. This is a legendary story that came from a farm near the town of Wallaceburg, Ontario, Canada. In the 1830s, a man called John MacDonald bought a prized piece of land. Many people tried to buy it off him, led by an old woman, but John would always refuse. One day, some of the women in the MacDonald family were talking and working in the barn when suddenly a pole fell from the ceiling. They put it down to a freak accident, repaired it, and thought nothing more. Sometime later though, a second pole came crashing to the floor, this time quite close to them. They couldn't figure out what was going on. Not long after, a third pole almost crushed them. Scared for their lives now, they ran out of the barn and into the house. This was the start of many strange accidents that plagued the MacDonald family. The family heard strangers in their kitchen at night. Bullets and stones were thrown through the windows until every pane was broken. A visitor was hit by a stone in the kitchen. He threw it in the nearby river. 5 minutes later, later, the same stone landed in the kitchen again. There were fires too, starting all over the house, sometimes even on the roof. A psychic told them that they had to shoot the wing of a strange goose that was near their home with a silver bullet. John MacDonald did that, and then a while later he saw the old woman who wanted to buy his land. She was sitting on the porch with a broken arm in a sling. From that day on, the mysterious happenings came to an end. Moving on to number 3 now, we have Creepy Farm 2. Do you guys remember that story earlier that I simply called Creepy Farm? Well, I found a sequel to it, shared by the same person, Angelus Crudus. They said, it's been almost a year since I shared my first story on here, and for a couple of months after I wrote it, our house was fairly quiet. Not so now. To give you a general layout of the house, it has an old front door which has been glued shut for many decades now, with a small porch and stairs outside of it that are falling apart and have a big pine tree growing through them. Beside this glued shut door is our front window. Our house sits maybe 10 feet from the gravel road in the front. On the left hand side of the house is our driveway, with a deck and side door towards the back of the house. We use this as our main front door. Once inside this door there is a small porch with another door that leads into the house proper. The house is very small, with one large living room that is our kitchen, and also a living room and stairs leading off of the living room, and 2 small bedrooms and a bathroom upstairs, complete with sloping ceilings. Our front window looks out over the road and has quite clearly had a bit of activity. In my first story I related how my husband saw someone walk by this house. Well, this has now become an almost weekly occurrence. I have seen it also. It looks like a short person wearing a white shirt or blouse casually walking by that window. This has so far only happened during the day. Then last week my husband and I were watching TV on the couch in front, and sort of to the side of the window we started hearing muffled conversation coming from the window. Our house is the only one on this rather long gravel road, and our nearest neighbour is about a mile away. It was very strange, so I muted the TV and we could hear distinctly 2 men talking to each other out there. As we listened, the conversation turned into an argument with both men raising their voices. It was muffled and we couldn't really make out words, but it was clearly happening. I was too nervous to go outside and check, but I did go to the window. I could only see the nighttime darkness of a new moon out there. The catalyst for me actually sharing this story happened 4 days ago on Saturday night. Our bedroom runs the length of the house upstairs, and because of the slanting ceilings we have our mattresses on the floor with a chest of drawers at the foot of our bed, separating our room in 2 with the door just beside this chest. Anyway, we had just gone to bed and I was reading for a few minutes with the lamp on when all of a sudden both my husband and I saw a shadow of a rather tall, large man walk into our room and into the back corner. As I type this I have goosebumps all over my body. It was the creepiest thing I have ever experienced. I obviously made my husband get up to check it, but there was nothing there. Needless to say, I didn't get much sleep that night and the lamp stayed on. One last thing, on the Monday following this I watched the same shadow walk up the stairs while I was sitting on the couch. I am sure that this shadow is the same as the old man who died in this house in the late 70s. The man was not happy in life and drank all the time, abused his kids, etc. I'm not sure who or what is outside our window though, because the shadow is tall where the thing outside the window is shorter. Anyways, thanks for reading about our recent experiences. Next up at number 2 now we have the blue body. This one came from Reddit user Shanae Smith and definitely left me with more questions than answers. They said, okay, so when I was 11 years old my house burned down at Christmas. While we were rebuilding that house, my family rented out a farmhouse around 10 minutes away. This farm had about 40 acres, 10 of which was a grassy field, and the rest of the 40 acres were all forest. Our landlord told us that the forest used to be a paintball field, but he had to stop because dumb kids were shooting his cows. Anyway, I was about 12 when my best friend came over. We were just messing around in the barns and decided to walk out and explore the forest. It took us a long time to get across the field, and we had to get through some prickles and barbed wire fence until we could actually walk through the forest. We walked away a while before we found anything actually interesting. We found some old little shacks covered in spray paint and moss. Most were filled with beer cans and random pieces of clothing. We found some very strange things there. Anyway, we were walking and climbing around all these things and all was going well when I heard my friend scream. It wasn't one of those joking "I'm gonna spook you" screams either. I shut up and ran over to her and I looked towards what she was looking at, and there it was, kind of hard to see, but tied up to a tree maybe 10 meters away was a mangled blue body. We didn't stay to investigate. We both booked it as fast as we could back to the house. We didn't even care about the prickles. We got sliced up pretty bad. When we got to the house, panting and sweating, we both started crying uncontrollably and told my mom everything. She called the police and they arrived shortly. They went out to investigate and an officer came back to tell us that it was just a rotting mannequin tied up. But they did find 7 dead bodies where the old road had washed out in previous months. He thanked us and that was the end of that. And finally, number 1 now, we have the rocking chair. We're finishing now on a story from Reddit user Lover. Great name. It's a scary story that actually spans 2 generations. They said, my grandma's is a very stereotypical horror movie house. Small Midwest town, white and old looking home on a farm. She even has a chipped wooden Mother Mary nativity in the front yard. The worst is she has a cemetery about a half a mile down the road. Anyways, I used to sleep in the room in the corner of the top floor, and it had a wooden rocking chair in it. When I was younger, I would wake up because I thought I heard it rocking, to the point where I would wake up my grandma and I have to stay in her room. Well, about 10 years later, my mom, aunt and I during Thanksgiving were talking about how creepy grandma's house was. My aunt goes on to talk about how when she was younger, the reason my mom and her ended up sharing a room was because she thought her room was haunted. She said she woke up one morning and the rocking chair was about 2 feet closer to her bed, and after that night it would start rocking on a nightly basis around midnight.
Coming into number 10, we have Old Green Eyes. I've heard of headless ghosts, but a floating set of eyes? That's pretty new to me. So Tennessee was an area of tension during the Civil War, and one particularly bloody battle in the state was fought at, I'm gonna try and pronounce it, Chickamauga. Did I get that right? Let me know, Tennessee. The battlefield is now a national park. However, if you are wandering around and think you spot a pair of green eyes peeping at you, turns out you might not be crazy. It seems that the voyeur is a Confederate soldier who met his end in the field. His body was never found, just his head, and now all that remains are his glowing green eyes. Now they're constantly watching over the field and looking out for his body.
At number 9 we have The Bride. One thing that I've learned after doing all these top 10 scary videos is never mess with a bride on her wedding day unless you want her to stir up some evil that will never take a day off. The legend of the bride is a classic one. Two young lovers who are forbidden to be together. They run away and set themselves up to be married on a secluded farm. But their parents catch up with them, the young boy is taken away to be hung, and then the young girl is shot and killed by her father in her wedding dress on the spot. My god, dude, do you know how long it takes to pick out a dress? Well, her spirit rose up because no one messes with a special girl on her special day. Now it haunts farms looking for her lost love and killing any man who dares to get in her way. At number 8 we have Baby Under the Stairs. Just off the title you should have goosebumps already. Anything living under the stairs makes me think of a basement dwelling monster that just wants to drag you into some hovel and eat your guts. This story follows a kid who would visit his grandparents' farm every summer. He would always have a great time, he was very close with his grandparents. But one thing that would always make him uneasy is how every night his grandparents' dog would just bark at the barn like there was something in there. The dog would just sit outside of the barn in front of these concrete steps that would lead into the barn and just snarl. Snarl so hard it's like there was some sort of creature inside of there. One day this young kid was going through some old family photos with his grandma. Looking at all the old pictures of his parents, he came across a baby picture that he didn't recognize. His grandma told him that this was a picture of his aunt. She passed away when she was only a baby, and they had a funeral for her, and then they buried her body under the steps leading into the barn. Ooh. At number 7 we have Myrtles Plantation in Louisiana. This legend was actually researched by National Geographic. So Nat Geo came to this old plantation to take some pictures, and much to their surprise there was an unexpected person in one of their shots. This was seen in the window. She is said to be the ghost of a young girl who is a slave on the plantation. Now she gets her revenge by photobombing white people's photos. Now she gets her revenge by scaring the hell out of white people by photobombing their photos. At number 6 we have Man of the Marsh. Some farms perform superstitious ceremonies to help protect them from the Man of the Marsh. You would take clover and rose and grind it up and rub it on the entrance to your house. If you fail to do this, you might be visited by the Man of the Marsh. Picture a swamp thing but wearing a flannel coat. That's basically it. You would know he came to visit you from the wet footprints he left behind and the haunting sight of an empty bed. Ooh. At number 5 we have El Chupacabre. Now we get to go to Mexico, baby. Pour me a tequila and someone throw some lime on ceviche. We're gonna party. But we're also gonna look out for El Chupacabre. This dude is basically a Mexican werewolf with a better name. He roams around the desert looking for small farms, and when he finds one, you better hope you didn't leave your livestock out because he's about to ruin your whole career. El Chupa's gonna come in and suck the blood out of all your goats until he's satisfied. And then you're gonna end up with a bunch of bloodless goats, and we all know that goats are best with blood inside their body. And he eats kids too, if he wants to. I mean, kids just eat, yell, and crap. They're basically goats without the cool beards. So if you're trying to get rid of a kid, just take it to a farm in Mexico and let El Chupacabre take care of it for you. And if you ask where you got this idea from, it wasn't me. At number 4 we have The Licked Hand. Gross. If you live on a farm, you probably have a dog. The dog does a lot of things. It lets you know when people are coming, it helps herd animals. And it's just nice to have around for a good friend and a good time. This urban legend is about a girl who lived on a farm and would lay in bed late at night and leave her door open for her dog to come in. The dog would lay next to her bed and lick her hand. And then she would slowly fall asleep. This would happen so often that she would never even check to see if it was her dog, she just already knew. One day she wakes up and her dog is missing. Her whole family goes looking for the dog and then they find him, dead. Something had killed their dog. The family mourned that night and then the girl went to bed. This time she slept with her door closed, feeling too heartsick to leave the door open. But when she draped her hand off the bed, something started to lick it. Ugh. At number 3 we have the Kaifek murders. It's 1922 in Germany. World War I is wrapped up and the Germans have taken a big L on that one. Everyone is probably still feeling the effects of getting their ass handed to them on a global scale. And a little family living on a farm hasn't been heard from for days. Someone goes to investigate and what they found was one of the most horrific murder scenes known. An entire family and their maid was brutally murdered with a blunt force weapon. Each one of them, including their 2-year-old baby, had been beaten to death and then hidden in the farmhouse. This might have just been a psycho killer cascade, but something very creepy about this is that there was a maid who was working there just 2 weeks before and she quit because she said that the farm was plagued by evil spirits. And who or whatever killed these people took care of the livestock after the people were killed. There were signs that all the animals had been looked after each one of the family members met the grave. At number 2 we have the Old Arnold Estate. If you buy a house from someone and they tell you you should leave the lights on at night, just move out right away. Right off the bat, your electrical bill is going to be stupid high if you have to leave the lights on all night. And what could be so horrible in the house that it makes you keep the lights on? I've never heard the story of turning your lights off at night and then Scarlett Johansson comes to visit you in your sleep and gives you $100. No, that's not one of them. Well, the Prawn family moved into this estate, they got this warning and still decided to stay. And then stuff started going crazy. They would see blue orbs fly through the house, furniture would get moved, mist would rise from the floorboards, and a ghost named Sherman would get violent with the family. I think after that, they moved out. At number 1 we have the Blue Body. A family was renting a farmhouse while their new home was being built. One day the youngest girl in the family and her friend decided to do a little exploring. They were walking through the bushes when they came across a dead body tied to a tree. Obviously this scared the hell out of the 2 girls, so they sprinted back to the house. When they got home, the little girl told her mom what they had just found, and the little girl's mom called the police. The body was that of a mannequin, so you shouldn't freak out. What should freak you out is that there was 7 dead bodies buried around the mannequin, one of which was an old resident of the house they were staying in.
Starting off number 10, we have Fort Abraham Lincoln Cluster House in North Dakota. You'd think that if your house was haunted by the love of your life, you'd kind of be okay with it, maybe. But that's what happened here at Fort Abraham. General Custer built this home for his wife, but unfortunately he barely got to spend any time in it. Custer died in 1876 and his wife decided that even in death they would not be parted. Mrs. Custer apparently haunts the home and has been spotted in her morning gown walking around. Lights flicker on and off and sometimes phantom voices echo when no one else is there. Whether or not Custer resides in the house with her, we do not know, but the romantic in me hopes that in some way they have been reunited.
And now at number 9, we're going to be talking about Monte Cristo Homestead. This farm was built in 1876 by a husband and wife. This farmhouse was built in 1876 by a husband and wife who wanted to start their own new lives together in Australia. The family had a great life until one day when their maid dropped their baby down a flight of stairs, killing her instantly. The maid swore that an invisible force pushed the baby out of her hands. The husband and wife died inside of the house shortly after, and now it is believed that their spirits haunt the farm. Visitors report that they can hear footsteps and voices telling them to leave. Young children also feel suddenly agitated and scared whenever they're near the stairs. The current homeowners say that they feel like they're living with another family, but you just can't see them. Well, you can't see them most of the time. I mean, no, this isn't for me. If I lived there, I would put this house up for sale as soon as possible, and I would take whatever the offers are. There's no way in hell I would share my house with angry ghosts. The Dandy House comes into this list next up at number 8. James Link and his family purchased a farmhouse and they couldn't wait to move in. Once they drove their moving truck onto the property, their neighbor came out yelling and said, "What are you doing here? You can't move in here." That's not the kind of neighborhood welcome I would want to receive. But anyways, the neighbor told them about dandies. They were the family that used to live inside of the farmhouse. The dandies had witnessed a series of unexplained unexplained events. They reported hearing strange chants, and they even saw the bricks from a chimney being removed by invisible hands. They even said that they could feel a burn on their bodies, and there's a male spirit dressed in a plaid shirt and blue jeans who holds a rifle at the end of the bed. Well, that would be enough for me to move out. The Dandy House is still a popular ghost hunting location, but for me, I wouldn't step a foot into that place. A haunted barn comes onto this list in at number 7. This is known as a Von Klein-Schmidt legend, and it goes something like this. A dairy farmer was helping his prize cow give birth when all of a sudden, the barn just burst into flames. He ran out to get his family to help him move the livestock out of the barn, but the whole thing quickly became engulfed in flames, and the family knew that they were in a lot of trouble. They stood in the middle of the barn holding each other as they were waiting to die. The neighbors could see the family inside of the barn yelling and crying for help, but there was nothing that anyone could have done. The next family to own the barn had a similar tragedy. They bought a bunch of cows, but a week later, they all got sick and died. The farmer had no idea what was going on, so he called the vet to come in to make sure that the cows didn't have an infectious disease. But the vet couldn't come up with a logical explanation. It seemed almost like the cows died from just being scared to death. The farmer didn't want to take any more chances, so he sold the barn because of all the supernatural things that's been happening there and all of the terrible things that have happened before. Yeah, I would say that's a pretty good decision, my friend, because something weird's going on that's killing your livestock. A White House Farm murders brings us to number 6. These murders took place in Essex, England in 1985. A husband and wife were shot and killed inside of their farmhouse, along with their adopted daughter and their twin boys. The only survivor was their adopted son, and he was Jeremy Bamber, who was 24 years old at the time. Apparently Jeremy was at home a few miles away when the shooting took place. During the initial investigation, police ruled that this is a murder-suicide because they believed that the schizophrenic daughter shot and killed her family and then turned the gun on herself. But the tables turned when Jeremy's girlfriend confessed that he had shot his own family with the semi-automatic rifle, and that's because he wanted to get the large inheritance. So he made it look like his sister did all of the killing, but he was convicted of 5 counts of murder, and he was told that he would never be released from prison. I mean, how the hell do you murder your entire family for money? This guy deserves to rot in jail for the rest of his life. He should just be forgotten about. Or maybe stick him in that barn where all those cows were dying and just see what happens. Elway Farm breaks onto this list at number 5. Elway Farm is located in the most haunted village in England. The farm was built in 1406, and since then, spirits have been haunting the farm. A man named Robert Dubois, while he used to live in the farmhouse, he was known to prey on local villagers centuries ago until he was caught for his crimes. Well, now it is believed that the creepy spirit roams the halls of this house, and he is known to grab people's hair, and they'll pull you in a room and slam the door shut. And then there's another spirit known as Edward Brett. Visitors can hear his spirit constantly whispering, "I will do it." Edward used to own his house until one day he walked to the dairy barn and shot himself. Well, apparently his ghost never left the farmhouse, and now the current owners say that they can still hear gunshots firing and Edward whispering. I would be whispering, is this real life right now? I would be totally freaked out. Scary Creatures pops onto this list at number 4. A farmer in Montana saw a weird looking animal approach his farm, so without any hesitation, he grabbed his rifle and shot him. What exactly did he shoot? Well, we're not really sure. Well, take a look at this thing. From far away, I guess you could say that it looks like a wolf, but once you get close up to it, the animal doesn't really look familiar at all. So experts were called in to identify the body, but they were stumped. They had no idea what that was. They were able to say that this creature comes from the same family as wolves and dogs, but they couldn't exactly figure out which species it actually belongs to. Once pictures of the dead animals popped onto the internet, people started to guess what the animal could be. Let me know what you guys think it is in the comment section below. A lot of people think it can be a dire wolf, or other people think that they can be like a severely malnourished bear. And then there was others who said that this could be like a dog man. I don't know whatever it is, but all I know is I don't want to run into anything that looks like that. Number 3 takes us to a farmhouse dungeon. I mean, that sounds like something straight out of a horror movie. A dungeon-looking room was found in a basement of this abandoned Pickering farmhouse located in Ontario, Canada, so not too far from where I live. The room was secured by a heavy door with several locks, and it seems like it was designed to trap someone inside. The room also had steel-linked chains hanging from the ceiling, a white bench, and 4 large water jugs. The person who found this room quickly notified the police, but the next day someone had already set this farmhouse on fire. Police became heavily involved with this case, and eventually they arrested a man named Robert White, who admitted that he had been working on this room for over a year and he planned on kidnapping a woman and keeping her locked up inside his own makeshift dungeon. So this guy was married, he had 2 children, and I can't imagine what they must have thought when he confessed to the crimes. This whole thing happened like an hour from where I live, so it's so crazy to think that someone in your neighborhood could have been captured by this guy. A farmhouse horror takes us to number 2 on this list. A family was looking to buy a farmhouse because they needed a bigger place. They were expecting a new baby and they thought a new life in the country would be best. So after about a month of living in this old farmhouse, things started to get really strange. The youngest daughter said that she could see a shadow figure lurking on the stairs, and they would stand next to her bed while she was trying to sleep. But of course she was told by her parents that they didn't believe her. But the next day, the mom was going downstairs and the shadow figure pushed her down. The mom hit her head on every step. Luckily, she survived, but that's not where the story ends. The little girl was having problems sleeping, and when she rolled over, the shadow figure was laying next to her. But his face was perfectly clear. He had red eyes, he was pale, he had scaly skin. While he went to reach for her face with his long fingernails, he ended up scratching her face so much that the little girl was left unrecognizable. The family left that night and never returned. It is said that this farmhouse is still up for sale, but no one has dared enter ever since. The farm murderer stabs his way into number 1 on our list. Robert Pickton was a millionaire pig farmer from British Columbia, Canada. It seems like he had everything made, but he was hiding a dark secret. Robert Pickton was actually a serial killer, and it is estimated that he murdered somewhere between 6 to 50 prostitutes from the Vancouver area. He would cut up their bodies and feed it to his pigs, but things got even more insane. He didn't just feed the bodies to the pigs, he would keep the heads, hands, and feet from some of his victims, and he would put them in his fridge. He also would throw some of them in a wood chipper for fun. Investigators also believe that he would combine human remains with pig parts and took them to a rendering plant in Vancouver to be processed into lipstick, shampoo, and soap. One of his victims managed to escape, but when she told the police what happened to her, they said that the evidence was circumstantial and that they couldn't arrest him. Is this real life right now? She was literally stabbed a bunch of times, and she can give you a full description because she was a prostitute, but you're not going to at least investigate the situation? Well, eventually Robert was arrested and sentenced to life in prison, but he was able to get away with these murders for a very, very long time.
At number 10 we have The Wandering Witch. Something that farms are always really good for is cheap labor. You have some kids, and as long as you keep putting food in their mouths, you can keep sending them out to the field to push plows. I can't think of a better reason to have kids. Soft slavery. Beautiful. The Wandering Witch is someone who would want to take advantage of this exact situation. It's said there's a witch who would travel from farm to farm at night, looking for children who should be asleep but have stayed up too late. She offers them a break from their daily work, a break from working super hard and waking up early to rake leaves and milk cows. She tempts them, and if your will is weak and you give in to her offer, she'll take you into the forest and you'll never be seen again. What does she do with these kids? One endless rave with no curfew? No, she slits their throats, drains their blood, and then uses it to keep herself young. Hey, we're all out here trying to stay hot. Get it, girl.
Coming in at number 9 is the Friendly Neighborly War. I mean, I don't know how friendly you guys will think it was after hearing about it, but yeah. Mary Hammond, a California resident, used to hate the sight of her neighbor Luigi Lugo. You know when you just don't like someone for no reason, but everything they do just pisses you off? Like them breathing, the way they eat, literally anything? Well, that was how Mary felt about Luigi. So in 1911, when he put up a scarecrow that looked exactly like him, she went insane. She went over to his yard, grabbed the scarecrow and brained it, beheaded it, and tore it limb from limb. Mary was then arrested for battery, but then was set free during trial because it was a bloodless murder. Honestly, if she did all that to a scarecrow version of him, I wouldn't be surprised if she ended up going for him in real life after after that as well. At number 8 we have the House of Scarecrows. Now that sounds like a really shabby 90s horror movie, but thankfully it's not. This one comes from Redditor Killer Orange Cat. Now some people live in small towns, but this guy lived in a trailer in the hills. A small town would have been a dream for him, his words, not mine. But anyway, the user's friend had a 13-year-old brother called Brody, and they all thought it was high time for him to learn how to drive. They took the user's car, put Brody in the front seat, cracked open some beers, and went on their way. The roads they were driving on had no streetlights, and the roads themselves were poorly maintained and very old. The boys were shooting mailboxes with a BB gun for fun, and they found a gated house that seemed long abandoned, and the boys started shooting the gate, as you do. The gate was locked with a padlock, but they managed to break it open with a bolt cutter. The car drove in and illuminated a very old looking house and a bunch of shadowy figures in the yard. Somehow, I don't know how, but somehow the car got stuck behind something and everyone got out to try and unstick it from its area. When the user finally looked at the yard with a flashlight, he was horrified. He saw dozens and dozens of scarecrows. I'm talking different sizes, different outfits, different genders, and it wasn't just a shirt and a hat. They were properly dressed in recognizable outfits. Some were in dresses or suits. There were even children's scarecrows, which were the creepiest part. It seemed to be depicting a party of sorts. Either way, just as he was taking this in, his friend shot one of them in between the eyes, or in between the buttons, if you will. And that was the end of that story. Filling our number 7 slot is the floating hat. Now in Beaufort, Australia, a couple of kids thought they could pass their afternoon by throwing stones into a nearby reservoir. This was 1908, before you say, why didn't they just play with their iPads or whatever? This is when people actually still went outside. Whilst throwing the stones, they saw a coat and hat floating in the water and just assumed it was a discarded scarecrow and proceeded to use those as target practice for the next 2 hours. After some time, the boys decided it would also be a good idea to check out the coat and the hat, so they did. They found the body of John Cuthbert's son, a retired engineer who had previously said he was done with his life. Police guessed he drowned himself and the stone throwers were never questioned. But I love how the first thing they thought to do when they saw something human shaped in the water was throw rocks at it. At least check first, kids. Now at number 6 is a scarecrow in the cornfield. Now this one's also from Killer Orange Cat. Apparently living in a trailer in the middle of nowhere lends itself to a lot of scarecrow stories, which I appreciate, so thank you. This one took place before computers and mobiles. He used to visit his grandparents who lived on a farm, and that farm had a lot of cornfields. Occasionally him and his cousin Carl would sit on the roof and look at the stars. One day his granddad needed help with the scarecrows in the field, and when he walked by, he swore one of them moved. He didn't think anything of it, and that night him and Carl went on the roof to watch the meteor shower happening that night. The sky was obviously stunning, but when he looked at the field, the same scarecrow looked like it had moved again. As he looked away, the scarecrow apparently jumped down from its post into the field. He screamed and told Carl, and he also confirmed the post was empty. Carl figured it must have just fallen and they left it there. A while later, the user saw the scarecrow emerge from the field and then it ran back into the field. The next morning, the scarecrow was on the porch with no stuffing. Right, remind me to never visit a cornfield for this very reason. Coming in at number 5 is Mr. Rogers. Now this one is slightly funnier than it is scary, but I thought number 5 may be a good halfway point for some comic relief. In 1903, BC Rogers and his wife were on their way home via horse and buggy, and they were riding along a river. They were looking at the riverbank and saw a woman and a little boy standing there, but then all of a sudden the boy lifted the woman and threw her into the water. Mr. Rogers, the noble man that he was, stopped his horses and tried to find the woman but couldn't see her anywhere. The boy had also disappeared, so he had no idea what to do. He ran to the nearest village and asked 2 men to help him find the woman's body, but again they came up empty-handed. He went back to the buggy and went to the nearest farm and spoke to the farmer there about the incident, maybe thinking he might know where the body was. The farmer ended up telling him that his grandson had gone to the river and disposed of an old scarecrow by throwing it in the river, essentially making his whole day's effort good for nothing. But I feel like there are better ways to dispose of a scarecrow rather than just throwing it in a river. You can throw it in the bin. You can burn it, I don't know. At number 4 is the Baden Regimen. It's common knowledge that troops fighting for any side had to think of creative ways to stay alive during the war. So in 1914, towards the start of World War I, French troops were on the move, but so were the German Baden Regiment. To survive another day, the French decided they had to do something drastic. Using the fog to their advantage, they went and got a bunch of debris and sticks from a nearby field and made scarecrows out of them. After putting their own hats on the scarecrows, in the thick mist they looked like helpless soldiers. Some troops were sent to lure the Germans to the field, and when they saw the scarecrows, they charged. They fell into the trap hard and they were surrounded from all sides by the French, and 100 of them were killed. After that, using scarecrows and dummies became a lot more common in war practice. If that was me, I would have been so pissed that I got myself lured into this trap and it was just a scarecrow. Like, I would have been shooting myself in the foot, but I wouldn't have had to because the French would have been shooting me all over anyway, so there's that. Filling our number 3 slot is the missing corpse. Now, in Wales back in December of 1953, a group of workmen were clearing some fields, which meant basically finding and throwing a bunch of debris into a bonfire. At one point, they found an old scarecrow stuck in some undergrowth and decided to just toss it into the fire as well. But as the clothes started burning away, the men started seeing bones being left behind. Confused as hell as anyone would be, the men went back to where they found the scarecrow and did a little more exploring and came upon a set of false teeth and a skull. Obviously, it was too late to save anything from the bonfire, but the police did manage to identify the body based on the dentures. They belonged to 66-year-old Ethel Winifred Collins, who had been missing since August of that year. Now at number 2 is the surprise. Now this one happened way back in 1909 in Pennsylvania. Maud Hefnagel was walking through a cornfield with her friend on the way to church when she saw something lying on the ground. She assumed someone had knocked over her dad's scarecrow, but when she walked over, she screamed and full on fainted. To her horror, she found the mutilated body of her father on the ground. Her dad was walking home on the same path and was attacked by a bunch of men, and he failed to overpower them, and he was hacked to pieces. His money was taken, anything valuable he had on him, everything was basically taken. A robbery that took a very twisted turn. The story ended up being printed in newspapers all around the country. I would also probably faint if I was going to a patch of grass and thinking it was a scarecrow but it was my dead dad. I think anybody would. Maud, I don't blame you. And finally, at number 1 are the wives turned crows. Female scarecrows are usually rarer than male ones, but they do exist. Now in 1906, there was a Hungarian farmer called Jean Plozzi who was slightly stingy, let's just say. When his wife passed away, he used her body as a scarecrow in his orchard to scare birds away from his fruit trees. If that wasn't weird already, the same thing happened with another farmer 4 years later in Amsterdam. Why all these men just using their wives as scarecrows, I really don't understand. Although the marriage was seemingly a happy one, the man still loved his crops more than he did his wife, and also dressed her corpse up in one of his old suits and made her a scarecrow. Neighbors freaked out at the sight of their once alive neighbor, now a dead scarecrow, and called the police on him. Thankfully, I don't know how thankfully it was, but thankfully he found out about it and removed his wife's scarecrow before the police got to his house. He didn't kill her for this purpose, by the way. She died naturally, before people think that. He didn't just kill her for this. He's not that messed up. But still pretty messed up for using his wife as a scarecrow.
Starting off things like we always do, and at number 10 we have the Old Arnold Estate. This farmhouse became infested with strange paranormal activities in the 70s, and it lasted for over a decade. The Perron family bought the house and moved in shortly after with their family. But the previous homeowner left them with one piece of advice: leave the lights on at night. I mean, what the heck is gonna go on at nighttime? Well, the Perron family quickly learned that they weren't the only ones living in this farmhouse. They were visited by disturbing spirits who used to live in the house before them. These spirits weren't evil to begin with, but as the family spent more time in the old farmhouse, the spirits started to misbehave. One of the most infamous evil spirits that occupied this house was Bathsheba Sherman. This spirit would have violent and angry outbursts, and most times she would injure the Perron family. Once the family decided to move out, the paranormal activities didn't stop. The new family that moved in said that the house is full of blue orbs and strange mist would rise from the floorboards. Furniture and objects would move on their own, and doors would slam shut in the middle of the night. These hauntings were actually the inspiration for the movie The Conjuring. Sounds like to me that this farmhouse is in desperate need of a cleanse. Or it needs to be torn down. Either way, I'm not going to be visiting this farm anytime soon.
Coming in at number 9, we have Skinned Tom. Sounds like a person I don't want to meet. Tom learned how savage love can be, and he learned it the hard way. He learned it as his skin was being peeled off his body. Hip hip hurrah. Now let me explain. Back in the 1920s, a young man named Tom felt the first pricklings of love. He asked out a woman he had eyes for on a date, and she said yes. They took a trip to the aptly named Lover's Lane in East Tennessee, where the pair kissed. And more. Unbeknownst to poor Tom, his sweetheart was actually married. Her husband suspected his wife was cheating on him and tracked the pair down. When he found them lip-locked, he killed his wife in a fit of rage. He then dragged Tom from his car and skinned him alive right there on the road. Now legend has it that Tom can still be found on Lover's Lane, only as a bloodied and raw ghost carrying a knife. He's said to appear to lovers who are cheating on their significant others when they park up to smooch. Coming in at number 8, we have the White Screamer. In White Bluffs, Tennessee, you could come across something scary in the woods. It seems that urban legend has it that once upon a time a local couple had a child, only the child was hideously deformed. They locked what they saw as the abomination in the basement, feeding it daily but showing it no love. It grew. It grew some more. It grew and it grew until it was child no more and got so big and strong that it could escape into the woods. But before escaping, it killed its parents. Living feral and naked, the creature survived on pets and livestock. Indeed, locals have reported seeing a big white creature roaming the woods. Those who haven't seen it have often heard it. It seems that the creature screams a terrible high-pitched wail into the night. Coming in at number 7, we have the Witch of Concord Cemetery. Concord Cemetery is one of the oldest cemeteries in Coffee County and is well known to be haunted by a number of ghosts. Now the most famous is said to be Sadie Baker. Sadie was thought to have been burned at the stake by her community in the early 19th century for fear of being a witch. Honestly, how horrible. Now, in order to keep ill wishes from the ghost away, locals are said to leave coins by her grave as an apology. If you don't make a money offering, it's said that she will haunt you in the graveyard. If you're feeling light of coin, maybe just don't go into a cemetery at night. Suggestion. Coming in at number 6, we have the Hell Tunnel. In Kingsport, Tennessee, you can find the Sensbow Tunnel, built by the Sensbow family and the government in order to allow traffic to pass. Legend has it that the tunnel was the scene of a grisly murder, the murder of none other than the daughter of the Sensbow family. It seems a robbery had gone very wrong and the intruder had stolen away a baby so that he was not shot at. He then dumped the baby in the tunnel and sadly it died. Now in the 1950s and 60s, rumours of the hauntings were strong. There were even rumours that more people had been murdered there. Locals who live near the tunnel warn people to stay away as the site has regularly been used for satanic rituals. Those who have been brave enough to venture through have said that they've heard a baby's cry and the shrieks of a woman. Coming into number 5, we have the Body Farm. Rumours have been circulating about a macabre scientific experiment in Knoxville, Tennessee. Locals wondered what a strip of private land was being used for, with hearsay declaring it a body farm. Well, actually, apparently it's true. Owned by the University of Tennessee, it seems that the body farm is a place where dead bodies are studied in various environments to see how they decompose. Some are simply left on the ground to rot, some are submerged in water, some are left in hot rooms. It goes to help future forensic scientists understand crime scenes better, and I guess that's a good thing, but honestly, how ghoulish. Coming in at number 4, we have the Headless Signal Man. Chapel Hill is home to a very strange mystery indeed. It seems that the area, especially around the railroad track, is home to some weird unexplained lights. Legend has it that one night a man was walking home along the track, holding a lantern to light his way. For some reason, he never heard the whistle and scream of the train as it came up behind him. Now the train driver tried to stop, but it was too late. The man was mown down. The lamp he was holding was reportedly never found, but can be seen today as he watches each train go by. Other versions of the story say that a headless signalman wanders up and down the track at night. Whatever the story, the lights are topic of frequent discussion amongst locals. Coming into number 3, we have the Cursed Bride of Rotherwood Mansion. Rowena Ross's life was inexplicably plagued with tragedy. Despite being the daughter of a successful plantation owner and living in a mansion in Kingsport, she seemed to attract terrible luck. Like a lot of young girls, she fell in love, and actually she was lucky enough to be loved back. Sadly though, on the day of her wedding, her husband died in a freak boating accident. She married again and he too died, this one of yellow fever. Fearful that she was cursed, she did marry a third time, but she was worried. Now this time, her husband didn't die, but her only daughter did. Absolutely destroyed by grief and a strange sense of guilt, Rowena took her own life. People claim that she still haunts the mansion today and can be spotted wearing white, walking the halls sobbing. Coming into number 2, we have The Boy in the Mirror. Pine Haven School is located in Jamestown, Tennessee, and is still a functioning elementary school. Beware though, there's a spooky tale attached to the school and an enduring urban legend of a ghost. The story goes that a group of bullies were terrorizing a young boy. Every day he would dread coming to school for fear of what they would do to him. One day they cornered him in a bathroom and shoved him hard into a mirror. Now the glass shattered and slashed his throat. The boys, bullies as they were, did not intend to murder him. They panicked and decided to bury his body under the school's floorboards, where he was eventually found. Now it seems that the spirit of the young boy still haunts the school today. If you're ever in the building, you should avoid looking in the mirror for too long, as you may just see a sad little boy staring back at you. Finally, coming into number 1, we have the legend of the Bell Witch. This is Tennessee's most famous urban legend and one of the most well-known ghost stories in the state. The legend of the Bell Witch goes as follows. In 1817, a cruel presence began haunting John Bell and his family at their home in Robertson's County. They had lived on the property for 13 peaceful years, but it all changed. They began seeing strange animals, hearing knocking sounds, hearing chains being dragged, and hearing weird guttural gurglings. This all went on for a year, and John Bell finally confided in his neighbours. A committee was formed to investigate what TF was actually happening. It seems that the witch began communicating with the crowds that formed to see what was going on. Their energy seemed to feed her and spur her on. Indeed, many say they spoke to the witch. It seems she knew details of the past and future, and she told those who asked that her goal was to kill John Bell and to make sure that his daughter did not marry a neighbour. John Bell died after a long illness in 1920, and eventually his daughter's marriage was called off. In 1821, declaring her work done for now, the witch said that she would leave for 7 years and then return, which she did. She came back to talk with Bell's son, saying that there was a reason his dad had to die, but she never disclosed her motives. She then fled again, saying she'd be back in 107 years, which would have been in 1935. Now, it is undocumented whether or not she did come back, but people still talk about the legend today.
Starting off at number 10 now, we have the Kaifek murders. On April 4th, 1922, a search party went out to investigate the Kaifek farm in Germany. The neighbours of the farm had not heard from the family who lived there in quite a while, and the children hadn't showed up for school. What they found horrified them. In the barn, they found 4 ravaged bodies covered with hay. Inside, they found the bodies of 2-year-old Joseph and the family's maid. The maid was actually new to her position there. She had replaced the last maid who left because she firmly believed that the house and the farm was haunted. The autopsies revealed even more horrors. The mother showed signs of strangulation and had 7 blows to her head. The husband was caked with blood and his cheekbones were sticking out through shredded flesh. Their widowed daughter, Victoria, had her skull smashed in and her head had 9 star-shaped wounds from a blunt object. Victoria's 7-year-old daughter seemed to have remained alive for several hours after her attack and had ripped her own hair out for some reason. Victoria's 2-year-old son had been killed with a heavy blow to his face, while the maid had died from a blunt force. Here's the creepiest part: the farm animals all around the house were all tied up but unharmed. Not only that, they had been looked after between the time of the murders and the discovery of the bodies. That means whatever or whoever killed the family actually lived at the farm with the bodies there for at least a few days, looking after the animals. To this day, the murders remain unsolved. The full story has many more grisly details to this almost century-year-old murder mystery.
Number 9, the Hager House, Hagerstown, Maryland. This house is crowded when it comes to hauntings. It is currently occupied spiritually by 2 families, the Rowers and the Hammonds. Jonathan Hager and his wife Elizabeth purchased the plot in 1740, but died in a tragic accident in 1775. 1865. After that, his son inherited it and passed it to the Rowers, who, when they died, passed the house to their relatives David C. Hammond and his sister Susan Armstrong. By the 1840s, though, a strange string of sudden deaths occurred. 4 of the grown children of the Hammonds died within 3 months of each other. Now this house sits empty in this world, though anything but in the next. Visitors report hearing disembodied voices and objects moving on their own. Number 8, Elway Farm, Kent, UK. In 1998, the village of Pluckley was verified with the Guinness Book of World Records to be the most haunted village in England. Elway Farms is one of the reasons for that claim. Built in 1406, the first residents of the home were ghosts. Apparently, as many claim the house has never been without them. Visitors report hearing footsteps creaking around the house, which some say could be Robert Dubois. Robert Dubois was a highway workman people say preyed on the villagers until he was stabbed for his crimes. But the spookiest occurrence that happens at the house is the one belonging to the tragic death of Edward Brett. Brett owned the farm in 1900 until one day he apparently said, quote, "I will do it," walked into the dairy farm and shot himself. Visitors report hearing a voice whisper those very same words before they hear footsteps leading out the door. Number 7, Monte Cristo Homestead, New South Wales, Australia. If a house ever has a tragic past, it is almost like guaranteed something sinister is about to happen. It's just a thing. It's one of the reasons real estate agents, for the most part, have to disclose whether someone died in the house or not. Superstitious or not, it does change the way people look at the place they're about to live. Be honest, guys, if you were told that somebody died in your house, what would you do? What would you do? The Monte Cristo homestead was built by the Crawley family in 1876, but soon after, tragedy struck. The haunting began the day the young daughter of Christopher and Elizabeth Crawley was dropped down a flight of stairs by their maid. The maid claimed that it was a mysterious dark force that threw her from her hand. Regardless of how or why, the death haunted the couple. When Christopher passed away, this tormented his wife even more, who reportedly left the house only twice before her own death since then, and then stayed thereafter. Families who have occupied the house periodically ever since have reported feeling sudden agitation by the stairs, or have even heard Elizabeth ordering them to get out of the house. They could hear steps on a wooden floor despite the house having been carpeted years later. If anyone chooses to live there for any amount of time, they have to decide whether they can live with another family and that they'll never be alone. Number 6, the Myrtles Plantation, St. Francisville, Louisiana. This 18th century plantation, along with its 600-acre land, carries with it a dark past. Only one murder was ever confirmed on the estate, but it is suspected that over 10 lives were taken. One of the most famous ghosts who reportedly walks the ground is that of Chloe. Chloe was a slave who poisoned the birthday cake of the daughters of Clark Woodruff to take a small kind of revenge. She apparently didn't intend for the girls to die, only to fall ill, but when they did die, her fellow slaves were so fearful that Woodruff would find out that they hung Chloe for her crimes. This is one of the tales that gets fluctuated over the years, but the verified murder was that of William Drew Winter, who was shot on his porch, reportedly crawled back into the house, climbed all the way up to the 17th step on the stairs in time to die in the arms of his love. Both tales have sparked sightings of spirits on the ground, and in Winter's case, visitors reportedly see and hear bloody footprints crawl to the 17th step, only to then stop. Number 5, the Bell Witch Farm. John Bell had a very interesting neighbor named Kate Batts. She was suspected of being a witch, and John made the foolish mistake of cheating her out of land. On her deathbed, Batts set a curse upon him and claimed that she would haunt the family forever. So, when he began hearing knocking sounds on the walls and the doors and chains being dragged around the house, he knew it was her. But then things started to get worse. His daughter began getting pinched and scratched, even beaten by invisible forces. Even John reportedly felt the stick being stabbed into his throat. John mysteriously died on December 1820, and many believe that Batts was responsible. For 200 years, visitors still report seeing orbs and hear talking and walking when no one is around. Could it be that Batts trapped the family with her to haunt the house for the rest of time? Maybe. But should you wish to visit, perhaps it would be wise only to view from afar. Number 4, the Loretta Lynn Plantation. In 1966, the same year Loretta Lynn's dear Uncle Sam swept the radio, she bought this 1876 plantation. Despite rumors that 19 soldiers were said to have been murdered there in 1863, 1973, Lynn paid no mind. But soon after moving in, Loretta and her family, of course, began experiencing very strange interactions. Her son Jack said he saw the spirit of a Civil War soldier taking off his boots. Then her son Ernest reported seeing two soldiers standing at the foot of his bed. And there's more. Her twin daughter spotted a woman in white sobbing on a balcony, and this time Loretta saw it too. In order to solve the mystery, Lynn reportedly held seances in the house. But then her son Jack tragically drowned in 1984, and Lynn and the rest of her family moved out. She opened it up to visitors eventually, but requested that not a single object in the house was to be touched. If they did, it would come at a terrible cost. When a tour guide accidentally touched an object, they were shoved down the stairs by an invisible force. Apparently, the ghosts in the house agreed with Lynn's demands, or were they demands they made of Lynn? Either way, though it may be open to visitors, if you do visit, perhaps keep your hands in your pockets. Before we get to our top 3, guys, if you like this video, you know what to do. Do the thing, like the video, subscribe, do a little dance, enjoy it. I don't know, do what you need to do, but we love you for liking our videos. Number 3, the Basilica Axe Murder House, Basilica. This next house literally has a sign outside that says Axe Murder House, so I don't know, I guess it's nice that they aren't trying to hide anything. It's pretty transparent. The story goes as follows. On June 10th, 1912, Josiah and Sarah Moore, along with their children, were bludgeoned to death inside their home. It is one of America's most infamous cold cases. No one knows who did it, and the home remains preserved exactly as it was on the night that they died, besides the bodies. Though many report that their spirits remain. The house remains a tourist attraction, and there's even a steep price to pay should you wish to stay the night. There's no running water or electricity, so that's kind of charming. Besides the lack of running water and no electricity, the $400 fee, it may just cost you your life. Allegedly in 2014, a paranormal reporter stayed at the house, and at 12:45 in the morning, the owners got the call. The man was covered with stab wounds, which authorities later reported were self-inflicted. Whether or not someone drove him to it, no one knows. The owners reportedly had people stay there all the time for the same price and nothing happened, but apparently just this time something weird happened, so who knows? Maybe the ghosts had had enough. Number 2, the Dandy House. Imagine finally walking up to your dream house, excited for what's to come next. And then somebody yells behind you, "What are you doing? You can't move here!" Which is exactly what happened to James Link the day he and his family moved into this beautiful farmhouse. Seeing the family move in, a neighbor drove by with this warning. Prior to Link, the Dandy family had been the owners from 1970 to 1974, and recalling the events they endured, their neighbor couldn't resist giving a heads up. Among hearing the typical disembodied voices and haunted footsteps, which belong to every haunted tale there is, they saw chimney bricks removed by invisible hands, and often their bodies would have inexplicable burns on them. The suspect no one quite knows enough about until one night the Dandies awoke to find a male spirit in a plaid shirt and blue jeans holding a rifle at the end of their bed. No thank you! Over the years, the family performed exorcism after exorcism, but the spirit always returned. The Links experienced the same thing, so they got the heck out of there, and today, the Dandy House remains a treasure trove for all ghost hunters. Number 1, the Old Arnold Estate. Okay, so we all know I'm a wimp. As I was writing this one, I was in my house alone, and I didn't want to move from where I was sitting, just in case my place was randomly haunted suddenly. Anyways, the movie that still haunts me to this day is The Conjuring. One of the scariest nightmares I've ever had comes from that movie. So when I say you couldn't pay me $1 million a year for the rest of my life for me to sleep in this house, believe it. The Old Arnold Estate is the farmhouse that inspired the film The Conjuring. 8 generations of family lived and died in this old house and apparently never wanted to leave. When the Perrin family moved in the 1970s, the advice they got was to leave the lights on. According to town records, 3 people committed suicide, 2 people drowned, 4 people froze to death, and lastly, a girl was brutally murdered. One of the reported was that of a rumored Satanist, who I will not name, cause reasons, who was reportedly the main reason for any attacks in the house. Famous paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren tried to help the Perrin family in the 1970s until they ended up moving to Georgia in the 1980s. So, don't go there. Don't go there.